The blaring sound of car horns pierced through the midnight silence, merging with the howling wind and the relentless downpour hammering against the windshield. The rain-slicked road shimmered under the cold glow of streetlights, casting fractured reflections like shattered glass. Aiden Lancaster gripped the steering wheel tightly, his sharp eyes scanning the road ahead. The storm blurred his vision, but he pressed on. Late nights were nothing new to him as an architect, but tonight, something felt different. An unshakable sense of unease gnawed at him. Then, out of nowhere, blinding headlights came straight at him, another car veering dangerously close. His hands reacted instinctively, jerking the wheel. The tires lost traction. The car spun wildly, skidding across the rain-drenched asphalt like a wounded beast thrashing in the dark. The deafening screech of metal against metal filled the air before. The impact was thunderous, splitting the night apart. The windshield shattered, shards of glass exploding like a hail of bullets. The vehicle twisted, flung mercilessly toward the guardrail before slamming into it with devastating force. Then, silence. Aiden felt nothing, only the rhythmic patter of rain against the mangled roof and the suffocating darkness pulling him under. The steady beep-beep of the heart monitor echoed in the sterile silence. A blinding white light burned through Aiden's closed eyelids as he struggled to open his eyes. The world around him was blurred, unfamiliar. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. A stark white ceiling loomed above him, tangled wires and tubes connected to machines beside his bed. A strange heaviness pressed against his body as if he had returned from someplace far away. Then, a voice, trembling. "Aiden, you're finally awake." He turned his head. A woman sat by his bedside, her bright eyes shimmering with a mix of relief and anxiety. Her fingers clutched his hand tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, he would disappear. Who was she? Aiden frowned, searching his mind, but there was nothing, no images, no emotions. "Do you recognize me?" she asked, hope flickering in her gaze. He shook his head. A flash of panic crossed her face before she tightened her grip, forcing herself to stay calm. "It's me, Camille, your fiancé." Aiden blinked. The name meant nothing to him, but in that moment, another name surfaced in his mind, distant yet crystal clear, like a whisper carried by the wind. Eleanor. His chest tightened. But why? And why, when he looked at Camille, did he feel absolutely nothing? Aiden's family arrived shortly after, standing around his hospital bed, their faces filled with worry. "Are you feeling all right, Aiden?" his mother asked gently, though her voice carried an underlying tension. He nodded slowly, but inside, his mind was a storm of unanswered questions. "The doctor said you have partial memory loss," his father explained. "Don't stress over it. Your memories will return in time." Memory loss. That explained why he didn't remember Camille. But it didn't explain the most haunting question. Why did the name Eleanor feel so deeply embedded in his soul? Taking a deep breath, Aiden scanned the room before asking, "Who is Eleanor?" Silence. Every gaze in the room shifted away. Camille, standing closest to him, clenched her hand slightly, but no one answered. "I know you heard me," Aiden pressed, his voice firmer. "Who is Eleanor?" His father exhaled heavily, placing a hand on his shoulder, as if to calm him. "Aiden, you've just survived a terrible accident. Don't force yourself to remember everything at once." Camille spoke next, her voice soft but oddly strained. Maybe it's just a random name, something that doesn't mean anything. But Aiden wasn't convinced. Something wasn't right. That night, as the sterile silence of the hospital room closed in around him, Aiden stared at his phone, fingers hovering over the screen. He hesitated for a moment. Was he ready for what he might find? Or worse, what if he found nothing at all? Nothing. No photos, no news articles, no traces of her anywhere, as if Eleanor had never existed. Days passed, but Aiden couldn't shake the name Eleanor from his mind. There was no trace of her online, no social media, no news articles, no photographs. Yet, deep inside, he knew she was real. His family's silence and Camille's avoidance only reinforced his suspicion that they were hiding something. One restless night, unable to sleep, Aiden absently scrolled through news articles on his phone. A small headline caught his eye. Seaside Art Exhibit, the story of a quiet artist. He almost skipped past it until he saw the accompanying photo. In the image, a woman sat by a large window, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. She was painting, completely absorbed in the brushstrokes on her canvas. Aiden bolted upright. Her face wasn't visible, but the way she sat, the elegant curve of her neck, the cascade of long, silken hair. Eleanor. A jolt of electricity shot through him. His pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the image, heart racing. Skimming through the article, he found the location, a quiet seaside town, not far from the city. Without a second thought, he threw off the hospital blanket, grabbed his coat. He had to find her. The rhythmic crash of ocean waves echoed in the crisp morning air. The cobblestone streets of the seaside town were still damp from last night's rain, carrying the fresh scent of salt and sea breeze. Aiden walked steadily down the narrow street, his heart hammering in his chest. He had no idea what he would say when he finally saw Eleanor. But that didn't matter. All that mattered was that he had to see her. He stopped in front of a quaint little gallery tucked into the corner of the street, his gaze lifted to the simple wooden sign above the door. Eleanor's art studio. His breath caught in his throat. Through the large glass window, he saw a woman seated at an easel. Her delicate fingers held a paintbrush, gliding it effortlessly across the canvas. She was completely immersed in her work, the morning light casting a golden glow over her. It was her. Without hesitation, Aiden stepped forward and pushed the door open. A soft chime rang out as the door swung inward, breaking the stillness of the studio. Eleanor's hand froze mid-stroke, her shoulders tensed slightly. Then, slowly, she turned around. The moment their eyes met, time seemed to shatter into a million pieces. For a fleeting second, something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Shock, pain, maybe even longing. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Aiden took a step forward, his lips parting to say her name, but before he could utter a word, Eleanor abruptly stood, her breath hitching, just barely, but enough for him to notice. And then she turned and walked away, her movements swift and deliberate as if running from a ghost. She hadn't run to him. She had run away from him. Aiden stood frozen in the quiet art studio, soft morning light filtering through the windows. The paintings around him were serene, but inside his chest, a storm raged. Eleanor had looked at him like he was nothing, and then she had walked away. Without a word, without a moment's hesitation. Why? The next morning, he returned. When Aiden stepped inside, Eleanor was arranging paintings. This time, she didn't leave, but she didn't look at him either. Why did you run away? His voice was low, steady. Eleanor stilled, her fingers tightening around the edge of a canvas. A cold, mirthless smile curved her lips. Are you pretending not to remember, or did you actually forget? She asked, her tone sharp. Aiden frowned. I don't understand. You don't understand, Eleanor cut him off, her voice suddenly razor-edged. Do you really not remember? Not remember how you abandoned me? Not remember that you chose Camille over me? Her words struck like a dagger straight into his chest. Aiden's mouth parted to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Eleanor let out a quiet, bitter laugh. You disappeared, Aiden. No explanation. No goodbye. His heart clenched painfully. His memories were still a blur, but the pain in her eyes was undeniable. I don't remember anything, he admitted, his voice hoarse. But I remember one thing. I love you. Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes burning with hurt. You remember loving me, she whispered, but you don't remember betraying me. And with that, she turned and walked away again. Aiden sat motionless in his hotel room, the dim light casting long shadows against the empty walls. His laptop screen glowed in front of him, filled with countless searches, none of which gave him the answers he needed. He had tried to remember, but every time he did, pain stabbed through his skull like a vice tightening around his mind. His memories of Eleanor remained a blur, Only the aching void in his chest told him that losing her had cost him everything. But even if he couldn't remember, one thing was certain. He had hurt her, and he wouldn't let it happen again. From that day forward, Aiden watched over Eleanor, not to disturb her, but to protect her. When a rival gallery spread malicious rumors about her, their reputation mysteriously crumbled overnight. Eleanor never knew, but Aiden had made sure she remained untarnished. When a shipment of valuable paintings was lost, leaving Eleanor on the verge of financial ruin, the artwork inexplicably reappeared on her doorstep the next morning. When threats emerged, pressuring her to leave town, they suddenly vanished without a trace. Eleanor never knew who had helped her. But Aiden didn't need her to know. He wasn't doing this to be forgiven. He was doing this because he loved her. A sharp pain tore through Aiden's skull. His breath came in ragged gasps as his fingers clenched the edge of the table, as if anchoring himself to reality. Pieces of his memory, long buried, began to snap back into place, like an old film reel rewinding in his mind. He hadn't forgotten Eleanor. He remembered everything. He remembered the happiness they shared, the nights spent dreaming of their future. He remembered her laughter, the way she looked at him with absolute trust. And then, he remembered that fateful day. That was the day his parents summoned him back to the Lancaster estate. "You should know your place, Aiden," his father's voice was cold. "A penniless artist like Eleanor has no place in this family." His mother's sigh was soft, but her words carried an undeniable weight. "If you refuse to let her go, we won't sit back and watch. It won't just affect you. Her and her family will suffer the consequences." Aiden had fought back. He had sworn to protect Eleanor, but when he looked into his parents' unwavering eyes, he knew they weren't bluffing. They would destroy her if he didn't walk away. And so, to protect her, he let her go. He left without a word, without an explanation, because he knew that if she learned the truth, she would never accept it. But his heart had never stopped longing for her. Every night, he found himself staring at old photographs, haunted by thoughts of what could have been, what should have been, if only he had been strong enough to defy his family. Now, he had nothing left to lose, and this time, he wouldn't let her slip away again. Aiden knew he couldn't hide in the shadows any longer. The first time, he let Eleanor go because of fear, because of his family's power over him. But this time, no one would stop him. Before he could return to her, he had to face his parents. As Aiden stepped into the Lancaster estate, his parents were already seated in the grand living room, their expressions cold, unreadable, as if they had been expecting him. "Aiden, do you realize what you're doing to this family?" His father's voice was low, authoritative. "Do you really think you can just walk away and leave everything behind?" His mother exhaled sharply, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You're throwing away your future for a woman who brings nothing to this family." Aiden clenched his fists, but this time he didn't waver. "You forced me into Camille's life. You threatened Eleanor and her family," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "But I'm not that weak boy anymore." His father scoffed. "Do you even understand what you'll lose if you walk out that door?" Aiden met his gaze without hesitation. "Everything." His mother's jaw tightened. "If you leave the Lancaster name, you'll have nothing. No wealth, no career, no status. Don't come crawling back when you realize your mistake." But Aiden simply smirked. "If losing everything is the price I have to pay for Eleanor, then I'll gladly pay it." And for the first time in his life, he walked out of the Lancaster estate without looking back. Aiden stood at the door of Eleanor's studio, his heart pounding in his chest. This time, he had nothing left to lose. No wealth, no status, no family backing him. Only himself. And the love he had never once forgotten. He pushed the door open. Eleanor was arranging her paintings, but the moment she saw him, she froze. For a brief second, her eyes flickered with something. Uncertainty? Hesitation? But then she masked it just as quickly, as if he had never existed. Aiden didn't back down. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said, his voice low but steady. "I only ask for a chance." She was silent. Then, after a long pause, she finally spoke. "If you want me to love you again, then prove it." Aiden smiled. This time, he wouldn't let her slip away. Aiden didn't just say the words, he proved them. From that day forward, he dedicated himself to showing Eleanor that he had changed. He came to her gallery every day, not to beg for forgiveness, but simply to be there. He quietly cleaned up, helped arrange paintings, fixed a broken easel. He listened as she talked about art, about the dreams she once had but never pursued. Eleanor said nothing, but she noticed everything. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but she couldn't deny that this Aiden was not the same man who had left her before. Then Camille arrived. She strutted into the gallery with a smirk, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Do you really think Aiden will choose you?" Camille sneered. "He's marrying me. Do you honestly believe you can change that?" Eleanor stiffened, saying nothing. But deep inside, a bitter pang shot through her heart. Before Camille could speak again, a firm voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Camille." Aiden stood at the doorway, his gaze unwavering. He walked forward, standing between Eleanor and Camille, without hesitation. "There is nothing between us anymore," he said, his voice calm but final. "I've chosen Eleanor, and I won't let anyone come between us again." Camille's smirk vanished. But this time, when Eleanor looked at Aiden, she no longer saw hesitation. He had truly chosen her. The ocean was quiet at night. Gentle waves lapped against the shore, carrying the cool scent of salt and sea breeze. Under the soft glow of the moon, Eleanor stood still, gazing out at the endless horizon. But her thoughts were on the man standing behind her. Aiden slowly approached, but this time, he didn't rush. He knew that for Eleanor to truly accept him, she needed time. "I remember the nights we used to walk here," Aiden said softly. "You'd tell me about all the paintings you wanted to create, but never got the chance to." Eleanor pressed her lips together, saying nothing. "I was wrong," Aiden continued, his voice steady, filled with regret. "Not just for leaving, but for not being strong enough to fight for us." She turned to face him, her eyes deep and unreadable, like the ocean itself. "Do you think you can just come back and I'll forgive you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Aiden shook his head. "No, and I don't expect you to." He inhaled deeply. "I just want you to know, I'll spend the rest of my life making things right, if you'll let me." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. She had tried to keep her distance, tried to protect her heart, but everything he had done, everything he had said, it wasn't just empty promises. A single tear slipped down her cheek. "Aiden?" she whispered. He didn't wait anymore. Aiden stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her, holding her as if letting go meant losing her forever. And this time, Eleanor didn't pull away. She let herself sink into his embrace, where she had always belonged. 1 year later, the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and soft purple. The ocean was calm, waves gently rolling onto the shore. Standing amidst this breathtaking scene, Eleanor had no idea what was about to happen. Aiden took her hands, his gaze filled with unwavering love. "Eleanor," he began, his voice warm and steady. "Since the day I found you again, every moment with you has felt like a miracle. You are not just the woman I love. You are the reason I exist." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as he slowly knelt before her. "The biggest mistake of my life was letting you go, but this time I won't let that happen again." Aiden pulled out a delicate, handcrafted ring, one he had designed just for her. "Marry me, Eleanor." Tears shimmered in Eleanor's eyes. Without hesitation, she nodded. "Yes, Aiden, 1,000 times yes." Applause erupted from the people around them, but the biggest surprise came when Aiden's parents stepped forward. His mother gently took Eleanor's hands. "We were wrong to stand in your way," she admitted, her voice no longer cold. "But if my son was willing to give up everything to be with you, then we know you're the only one for him." Eleanor smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. A week later, on the very same beach, they exchanged vows. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Aiden kissed Eleanor, the waves softly whispering around them. They had lost each other once, but this time they would never part again.